And also, before the introduction here of our guest speaker, whom we're very excited about, he's going to speak, and then, as is our usual custom, we'll leave some time at the end for questions. There's two ways to address questions. One is to write them down and ask them at the end. That's almost the preferred way. But clearly, if you think of one during the presentation, feel free to put it in the chat room, and then I can make sure that question gets asked, and Bjorn will answer it. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Monica Devers. She's the Dean of Professional Studies and Graduate Programs at Augsburg. She wears some big hats, and that includes the business school. And appreciate Monica joining us, and she's going to introduce our guest speaker here tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Corey, and thanks everybody for joining us. We had such a great series last year, so this is the first in our series for 2021-22, and I'm just delighted to introduce Björn Stansvik, the pioneer, founder, and CEO of global software design and development firm MentorMate. He has steered the company's vision from inception to 750 full-time employees, accelerating digital ideas with end-to-end technology services since 2001. He has worked in high tech and strategic business development in Europe, Latin America, and the United States prior to founding MentorMate in 2001. I will note that the Star Tribune included MentorMate in its top 150 workplaces list, and the newest of its 7 offices opened in AstraZeneca's BioVenture Hub in Gothenburg, Sweden, back in 2016. Again, I can't think of a better way to kick off this series that we're going to have this year. Again, thank you to our students, and I'll pass it over to Bjorn. Thank you so much for speaking with us this evening. We're really excited to hear what you have to share with us and with our students as well.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thanks to Jake and Corey for setting this up. I had a lot of fun actually putting this together. So what you're about to see is the first time we've shared it here. It's always changing a bit, the story, but it's so useful to look back and try to draw some patterns and inferences out of what has happened, in this case, over the last 21 years. So I'm going to compress those 21 years to about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. You'll notice that the title is a little different because I changed it after thinking about it a bit more. So I'm calling this Pivotal Innovation. And the reason I'm doing that is that as I was thinking about, our path from the past to the present and the future, and you can see an illustration of that path around the word pivotal innovation, kind of what it's been like. The word pivot I thought was really good, and then combining with innovation, which is obviously the theme of it here. So I have that up there. First, which was mentioned already, a few words about MentorMate. So yes, we are a custom software development firm, meaning we integrate strategy, design, and software development services. In doing so, we work both with large and small companies. So whether it's a venture-backed startup or a Fortune 500, we assist them in going faster and further and thinking differently about how they can approach business through the lens of technology. And in doing so, we've, as mentioned, grown to about 750 people now. I think we're at about 1,400 projects, and we've been on a few of these Inc. 500, 5,000, and Minnesota Fast 50 lists, and so on in the process. And I'll share how we got to where we're at today and some lessons along the way here. So first off, when you think about progress or having some sort of success, sometimes it's seen as a step of, first you take this step, then you take that step. But our experience, and I don't think it's that unique, has been a bit more along the lines of a more circuitous path, if you will. So let's see here if I can bring that up. There you go. So that's more what it's been like. And in thinking about that, that's really what what is the better representation of what has happened. So if we start at the very, very start, 2001, I picked, so I said I changed the title a bit, so it was 5 acts. It's actually going to be 7. But the first one of them, I call Invent. And what led to that, or the obstacle that I saw at that point, was really coming from school, seeing suboptimal educational accessibility and the flow and the status quo, textbooks, etc. At that point in time, I was trying to teach myself Mandarin, Chinese, and I wasn't doing that well. You know, it was either too hard or the book was somewhere else. So I got the notion of how can we deliver education anywhere? So mobile came up, right? But this was 2001, so the iPhone wasn't around, but the Palm Pilot was. So I started working a lot with that. And then the other notion I had was the concept of flow, meaning you don't want an educational challenge that's too hard or too easy, right? You don't want to be frustrated or bored. And I studied a lot and read up a lot on educational psychology authors such as Bloom, Harold Bloom, The Second Revised Taxonomy of Learning with Higher and Lower Order Thinking Skills, where you progress from the basic to the more advanced thinking skills. So from rote memorization up to analysis and critique and synthesis and creation of information. And then I took that and really packaged that into what became a patent around formative adaptive assessment. So the software would sense in real time, how well are you doing, and adapt the difficulty level by changing the semantic format of the question in real time. And we did all of this on a Palm Pilot with a backend system of web. So it was really a cloud app even before that term was being used. So that was the idea or the invention. Now there were a few more obstacles left, meaning the product wasn't built. It was just an idea, and I didn't have any money. And I'm leaving out the whole part of how I came to America and got a work permit. That's a long different story, but it'll make this presentation too long. So I was already here in the States. At any rate, fundraising proved also a pretty interesting exercise because of the timing, partly. So this, if you recall, was the .com crash. So fundraising was not the easiest thing to do. And but it was still done through a series, maybe 300 or 400 meetings at coffee shops, raising the amount of money needed. So it was about $1.5 million between cash and services, and then building a small team to deliver on this invention. First, I used a consulting firm, not too different from what MentorMate is today, quite frankly. Unfortunately, the experiences there weren't that good. So then I hired. Unfortunately, I didn't hire the right people. So again, the experiences weren't that good. But then I stumbled across, and partly through the law of large numbers, if you try enough things, something in the end might work. Someone who knew someone in Bulgaria, essentially. And what's important to know about Bulgaria is that it was the designated excellence center for software back in the communist days. So there was a rich talent pool of people there to help with this. I actually didn't know that at the time, but met a phenomenal individual there by the name of Dimitar Dobrev, goes by Mitko. And he and I started collaborating, and things started picking up a little bit more speed. So we actually got the thing built, and it was a real product, and we could show it and so on. So that was very, very exciting to see happen. And we progressed slowly from him and building out this, what we thought was amazing product. Only problem then, of course, being it was on a Palm Pilot, which is not the iPhone, and we were trying to sell to the educational market, which doesn't always have a lot of money and doesn't always move that very fast. And we didn't have enough capital to build out a content library that would be compelling. We focused on advanced placement to start. So the next obstacle was that we were going broke, and we were unable to find clients for this educational solution I called IQPAC. And then, as I said initially, the other problem was we couldn't build it either. But that part we figured out, so we did build it. And we had to figure out a way of surviving. And we tried a lot of different things, but it was really a gradual path. We wanted to stay very focused on our product because we thought that was the holy grail. It took us, it took me about 4 years to develop better listening skills, but I was really just evangelizing this solution and preaching it to anyone who would listen, and even people who might not listen, I was still preaching it to them. Obviously, that didn't generate a lot of revenues, and I learned, all of this took years, that the phrase "it's interesting" is probably Minnesotan for "I'm not interested," but it's the Minnesota nice way of saying that. But it took me 4 years to understand that. So we started looking at how can we make money, and the first pivot or semi-pivot there was related to No Child Left Behind. That legislation, and one challenge back then was that computers were up, down the hall, up the stairs in some lab, and they weren't really that accessible. It wasn't like every kid had an iPad or like things are today. So we said, well, if you're a school and you're afraid of losing funding, we have this testing mechanism where you can test kids more cheaply on a $99 Palm Pilot and get that early indication, so you avoid losing those funds. So we partnered with Plato Learning, it was called, Minnesota company, and got our first revenue. I think it was $4,500, and that was I think that was our first revenue. We might have gotten a few hundred earlier. We were working with Century College and so on. It's a bit long ago now. But it wasn't really enough, obviously, to keep the company going. And then someone suggested to me, you really ought to go talk to the state of Minnesota. There's something called the Minnesota Government IT Symposium. And at this point, we were at our last leg, and I just looked at this person incredulously and said, really, sell to the government? I couldn't think of anything slower or harder, and I knew nothing about it. But she was adamant I should do it, and reluctantly I agreed to have us show up at this symposium. And it wasn't actually me, but one of the employees who had just been laid off because we were about to go out of business. But he was there, and one person at the state of Minnesota, at the Department of Health and Human Services, stopped by and said he had been looking for us guys for 2 years, someone who could do mobile computing, because they had a grant from the federal government to digitize records for foster care and mental health care facilities and so on, for the licensing process of those. So we ended up getting that opportunity, and I offered quickly to write the SOW because I thought that might help, and then also actually snuck in a few very difficult technical things to achieve there, because we're such experts with the Palm Pilot, and thought this could be our big break. But a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call from him saying, no, sorry, my boss had someone else in mind, and thanks for your help, but no thanks. But a couple of weeks later, they called back and said the other company said they couldn't do whatever I had put in that SOW, and wondered if we wanted to pick up the work, and we did. And that really helped us get started that project. So we worked through that, and the team grew somewhat. So that was just one of the engagements, but one thing leads to another, and so on. So we kept growing a little bit to about 34 people. And what happened then, as I think many know, that 2008 was really the year of the Great Recession. So now when we had moved from 13 to 34 people, the difference was that in the 13-person configuration, I was the only person in the United States doing really everything. So now we expanded, and some things didn't quite work out as planned. So we weren't able to hire the absolutely perhaps top layer of employees because our funds were so limited. So one truism they say is that it's so important to hire the right people, but that's not very easy if you don't have money to offer to the people that you want to hire. So there was a lot of back and forth and fighting fires. And then on top of it, obviously the recession hit. So we had an evaporation of demand. So the lesson there for me was that a challenge seldom comes alone. There's many times it's more than one thing going wrong. In that instance, I knew we had to cut back, but at the same time, just cutting back, I knew that couldn't be the whole answer. So I knew we had to place a few bets, and we placed a couple, and the two that I recall as some of the larger ones. One was in online marketing. SEO was taking off around that time. And the other one was, I came across an old colleague who had been watching me for about a decade saying, I think your time has come, or something to that effect. I think mobile is really going to happen soon, he said. So he had a better sense of timing than I did, because I thought the Palm Pilot was the iPhone. But now the iPhone had actually arrived, and it was started. The App Store, I think, was launched in 2009, if memory serves. So we made some painful cuts, and we gambled on the one hand, SEO. That didn't work out. We tried a number of times, but then the other thing that did work out was mobile applications. So that really turbocharged growth from that point onward. And we started growing really, really fast, like 100%, or I think some years 160% year over year. And the team got up to about 130 employees or so. And we ended up on a few of these lists. The next challenge became that we had stepped up the quality of our talent, and these were very attractive people. So companies like Best Buy and Target would try to recruit them from us. And if I let them succeed in taking our talent, obviously we weren't going to get very far or very fast. So I brought it to the board. Now I was the key owner, I was the founder, but I still had other shareholders because I had raised that money. And I said, I want to give away 40% of the company to the employees to incent them to stay in the face of all these cash-rich offers from the big companies in the Twin Cities. And the board didn't like that because some of them had invested and didn't want to see that kind of dilution. And we ended up at 20%, and I think that was perhaps about right. And then they gave us something meaningful to offer people, and this was predicated on attainment of certain milestones. I would say I remember our plan being, we wrote it in 2010, and our plan was called 15 and 15 at 15, meaning that we were about, I forget, and this is going a year back, so we were smaller. So I think we were around 1 million in revenue, maybe 1.4, and then so we were going to grow the revenue by about 1,000%, and then the profits were non-existent because we were reinvesting everything into the business. So about 2,200% over a 5-year period. And if that was attained, then people would get increasing shares of the company. So that became our great talent incentive. The other thing that was a challenge during this time was that this phenomenon it wasn't only going on in Minnesota, but also in Bulgaria, where SAP and other big companies like that were poaching our talent. So we implemented the same program there, but in addition to that, we also built the dev camp. So there weren't enough developers, so we started our own university of sorts to do that. During this time, a couple of other interesting things occurred. One of them was that Medtronic reached out to us and said something along the lines, or they filled out a web form, one person did there, and said, I'm the worldwide director of training and for salespeople at Medtronic, and we just started a pilot with 5,000 iPads, and we're interested in teaching our sales reps about product knowledge like stents and so on the go and whatnot. And your name came up as a pioneer in this field. Would you be interested in talking to us? And 5 meetings later, I had convinced Medtronic that they should reinvest, or they should invest, period, into that old solution that we have, but not on Palm Pilot, but on iPads, and not for high school students, but for their salespeople, of course. And we would retain the IP and have a license fee. So we're setting up a SaaS company in the middle of this very rapid growth of the services business. So we got that going with Medtronic, working across the globe with them, from the States to Europe to Japan. And then the challenge was a bit to have all the hours in the week be enough, because it was really 2 full-time jobs, and we're starting a conference company at the same time. That was more a marketing tool, but it was still a 3rd full-time job. So what I did was, in a way, it would have been fun to work on that product company, but the services business was growing just so fast and so associated with my name that the alternative cost for taking my foot off that gas pedal would have been greater than any other benefit. So I found another CEO for the product company, awarded some equity, sat on the board, spun that off, made an investment into that, and let that grow on its own. And before that, actually, we got 10 clients on it. So it had some mass, including Principal Financial Group, ADP, and so on, some big companies. So that started living its own life and actually became a client of the services company that MentorMate was now focused on being. So that happened in tandem. And then we also had another product idea. So as you can tell, it's not that pure straight line. So this is what I mean a bit with the messy component of it. I mentioned SEO and web marketing before, and one of our brilliant coworkers had come up with a SaaS tool for assessing websites in terms of their web marketing sophistication, a FICO score, if you will, of the web sophistication, or a spider score. So it would spider the site and say, okay, in these 6 dimensions, you're doing so and so well. So we looked at launching that, eventually decided against that because of just the limited market we saw and the massive investment that was needed. But it did serve a number of purposes. One was landing a major client that just became fascinated with this tool. We had some other product ideas that ended up not working out, but it wasn't for a lack of ideas. We tried a lot of different things. So from here on out, from the 2011 and Incent, I'm jumping forward to the 2014. So here we're 3 years later. And what had happened then is that we had been recognized in all kinds of newspapers as a very fast growing company. We were at about 250 people now, and the business was consuming a lot of cash. We were more or less a break-even company at this point, not because we couldn't make profit, but because we chose to reinvest everything into growth, because we felt this mobile tsunami was a land grab, really, that we needed to go after and gobble up market share. So the working capital requirements were increasing constantly. I was personally guaranteeing everything, and we needed to get better capitalized to secure that opportunity, and also, quite frankly, take some chips off the table for myself and to grow bigger. Another trend driving this was our clients tended to be bigger at this time, so they had more diverse needs. So we needed to build out more practices. In the end, so what happened there? So selling. So the phone started ringing a lot when we were on these lists. I think I got about 70 offers to sell the company or have investors jump in and so on. And back in 2010, the 15 and 15 and 15 plan, we knew what our number was and what we wanted to get. And most of these offers weren't anywhere near that. In fact, they were around 20% of what we were aiming for. And they were coming in 1 year early. So from one perspective, that was understandable, but it just made the conversations fairly short. So after about 70 of those, we just said, no, not interested. Come back next year. We can talk. We're just too far apart. I didn't want to start those conversations. I felt it wasn't a good use of time. There was a guy who knew a guy who I think knew me out of Chicago, made an offer for 40%. And I told him the same thing, and he went away. He did some more due diligence. And a couple of weeks later, he called me up again, and he offered me, I think, 80% of what we wanted. At that point, I said, okay, now we're close enough that we can start a dialogue. And I gave him 17 reasons why 80% was not 100%. And then he called me back again, exasperated, and said, Björn, you're killing me, and why are you so difficult? And I said, it's not my job to make your life easy. I spent 14 years building this asset. The number is the number. You can wait till next year, and we'll see if we're around. But I'm not negotiating, I said. And he said, fine, get on a plane to Chicago. I'll make an offer you can't refuse. I said, fine. So I got on the plane with my business partner, James, and so he made the offer we wanted. There were a few little details to work out. And on the plane back, James was saying, do you realize we did it? You look back 5 years, we're drawing those lines on a whiteboard, and, we actually did. And we did hit that plan on the nose, just 1% off. We actually 1% ahead of that plan. How does it feel? And, he was asking me, and I said, it feels pretty good, but I think we can do better. And I have an idea, I told him, and he got worried I was going to bungle this opportunity. I said, don't worry about it. I know what I'm doing. And I started typing an email to Taylor Corporation, because 2 or 3 years ago, we had a strategic talk with them, like many others, about maybe doing something in the future, and it ended up being nothing. But as I thought about the whole process, you don't want just one bidder, but at the same time, I didn't really feel it was the right time to hire an investment bank and go through all of that. So I just wrote him a pretty simple email saying, we talked a few years ago, and the timing might not have been right then. Maybe it is now, and I didn't want you to feel left in the lurch in case you read about us having been acquired. So I wanted to open up the topic again, because I think it might make sense, something to that effect. And they responded and showed up pretty quick, because the timing was good, and they were trying to transition to more technology, and had an experience with Shutterfly, where I think was really a missed opportunity. So in speaking with them, I emphasized that and said, sometimes big companies make big mistakes and miss big things. I was kind of twisting a knife in the wound there a bit, and saying, if you don't acquire us, you're committing professional negligence. And at first they laughed at me, but then they started nodding. So then we got a deal done, and I started working with them. And what was funny was that 10 days before I was supposed to sign that binding LOI, we got another offer from a SaaS company. I had spoken with their CEO 5 months prior, and he said, I want to explore this, but that was just a little bit too late at that point, because certainty is worth a lot. We just couldn't do it at that point. So that was how we got. Oh, and then we didn't stop trying to invent and throwing things at the wall. We came up with one more product, Bev Engine, which was for independent liquor businesses, where we had worked with one really forward-thinking one, and came up with, they're competing against Total Wine and so on. So it's really difficult if you're a small one. And we came up with a recommendation engine, kind of a Pandora of whiskey tasting and events management, and just kind of helped bring the mom and pop liquor store into the 21st century for this one really forward-thinking one. And we increased, I think, the sales volume, if memory serves, like 11 or 14%, which is very meaningful. So then, in collaboration with that liquor store, we said, let's go to market with that and white label this. So we started working on that But then after Taylor came on board, they said, nah, that doesn't really fit with our portfolio. We think that's a distraction. So it went away for that reason. But what they saw in us, I think, was a path to the future, because they're very heavy in print, commercial print, and a few other areas. And we would be an answer what happens, when the print goes away and so on. Now, we're run extremely autonomous. I still run the company before, like I did before selling it. And there's been some integration, but very, very light. So the next step on the journey that I've chosen to emphasize is when the pandemic struck, because that was also obviously an important moment in time for so many reasons. And I call that grind, because at this point, we're about 600 people now. And when the pandemic first struck, it was really anyone's guess. What's going to happen? Will our whole business evaporate? What will happen, right? And what we elected to do was to circle the wagons and really focus on our existing clients. It was obviously, in a lockdown, it was extremely hard to do new business development. And furthermore, we felt that being too aggressive was going to be perceived poorly as well. It was just not the time to be out there. So we took more of a helping educational approach and really focused on our existing clients. And we had, I think we dropped 6% of revenue within weeks of the first lockdown. A few clients went out of business, and then we clawed some of that back with existing clients. So we kind of made it up, I think, after eight weeks or so. And then there was another drop off with another 3 clients going bankrupt, dropping 7% of revenue again. But after that, something remarkable happened. We just kept climbing and climbing and climbing. In retrospect, that's maybe easy to see. I think we did a few things right, but also we were beneficiaries of the fact that in a pandemic, you need software more than ever. A long time ago, maybe 15 years ago or so, maybe 10 years ago, Mark Andreessen said, or declared in a memo in the Wall Street Journal, that software is going to eat everything. When he said that, I think it was more just a clear trend. But the pandemic made it a reality really overnight. So I think it compressed, from a technology perspective, things by a decade or so. That was a point where we just focused, like I said, on existing clients. And the next step from here that I think is worth emphasizing is the one we call transform. So that is thinking about, how can we grow from a geographic perspective and also a technical innovation perspective, and move from being an implementer to being a guide for our clients. And this, all the chapters have not been written here. Obviously, this is a future date, but we're in the process of, for instance, buying a company in AI, and there are all these new different trends going on, maybe new business models, but it's sure that we're going to continue this path of trying and seeing what works and going that route as we have before. So to conclude then, to bring it all together, in our case, the chapters have been invent, survive, gamble, incent, sell, grind, and transform. So this has been our journey, very, very compressed, of course. In the way I look at pivotal innovation, it depends on 3 big things. It depends on who you are, because who you are, pivot, we went through the meaning of that word earlier. Pivot relates to where you already are. It's not something that's entirely new. You are using some assets. So back in the day when we had built learning methodology, the asset I realized we had then was really the Rolodex of people we had met, and also the very strong technical talent in Bulgaria. So that's the first thing. Who are you? And then who do you serve, or who do you intend to serve, perhaps more importantly, how that changes, and where you're going as a company from the role you play. Perhaps you're going from builder to guide and so on. And these three things, they interact, they usually come multiple at the same time. So what becomes an interesting challenge is, of course, how do you combine these several at a time and fit them together, and then of course execute on them. So that's how I would frame up pivotal innovation. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, and I'll just step in before we get some questions going here, Bjorn, and just say thank you. That's one of the more interesting presentations and concepts I've seen, and I have a feeling many have seen here on innovation, kind of how it organically flows. It's almost like a process, but you were learning it as you went along. I couldn't help but think you have an HBR article there. So I hope you copyrighted all this.
Yeah, speaking of HBR, I'm a pretty big fan. They have some good stuff, and one that it's actually one from the 1980s, I think, by Henry Mintzberg. I think it's called Strategy Formulation. He likens it to forming clay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
A potter.
Yep.
In a way.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's kind of what you did. But
Yep.
No, appreciate it. Now, I want to go ahead and open it up to any questions that are out there. I'm assuming we'll hear some. So I'm going to open the floor up. I didn't get any in the chat room.
Corey and Bjorn, Steve Endred here. I have a question. Thanks for your presentation. Thanks for your dedication to your company and your great success. That's pretty amazing and really cool to hear the story, even though condensed. I'm curious what you might have looking back, because 2020 vision is always best in the rearview mirror. When you think about your initial phase through your fourth phase, and I don't want to misquote them. If you want to put them up, I could get them right. But basically from startup to where you felt like you actually had something more stable, and yet so you're in that incent. So from invent to incent cycle to get through the survive and gamble stretch. In hindsight, what would you do differently? What would you advise? And that could be just themes, or maybe very specific to your situation. Anything that you would offer?
Yeah, I was trying to find the best picture, and I realized this is probably the one, because the one before that doesn't have the words on it. So you said, what were the phases between? Yeah,
so from really the invent phase, getting through that survive and gamble, a bit of a trough, right? And the struggles as you've lived them firsthand, till you finally get to the incent space and you feel like, gosh, I'm finally making it where I wanted it to be. And you obviously had lots of years there. And lots of learning. So it really, how would you summarize your learnings in a point or two or three or maybe 20?
Yep. No, it's a great question. And the reason I think it's great is because the first stage is the hardest. The first employee is the hardest. The first $1 million revenue is the hardest. Now, $1 million, that's still a lot of money, but it's kind of more just, it's a project, that's one more project, right? But back in the day, I mean, like I mentioned these numbers with $4,500 and so on. So it was definitely, so it's definitely a good question there. The second thought that comes to mind, that was a big one to me, I said it took me 5 years to develop listening skills. Now I mean, to start a company, it probably skews pretty heavily towards people with a lot of confidence, right? But you can't be overconfident. But if you're not confident enough, you're not going to do it and you're going to give up. So it's always this kind of balance or paradox or dichotomy what you have. So you always have to somehow bust through all these catch-22s. And what I'm trying to say is that my original idea had merit, that there is real educational substance behind it. That's why Medtronic later said, hey, we want to do this, and it became a company. And I forgot to mention, we sold that company too. So there was real merit there. But at some point, listening to the money and not the praise. This is interesting, get another article. I mean, all those things are nice, and they're not unimportant, and they're meaningful. But when you have payroll to meet, when it's your name on that dotted line with the bank, and it's your house, and so on, you have another level of responsibility for other people as well, and yourself as well. So listening to the money, was one. What do people pay for? And I remember that as this was starting to dawn on me, we were still focusing on the educational platform. And I remember this one meeting. Actually, I'll use two examples. One was with Century College, and at this point, we were still clinging to that idea, and they liked it, and they said, well, you're just a startup and we're a big college, so you should be grateful to be doing business with us, so we should get it for free, some version of that. And I said, no, if it's valuable to you, you'll pay. There was some modest price, but you'll pay, because if you can't pay that, it's not worth anything to you, and it's not worth anything to me, and we shouldn't do it. So the price is really not in question here, I told them. And they paid. And with Medtronic, I did the same thing, because in the beginning, when they were starting to get curious, they say, can you do this? Can you do that? And I said, yes, I can, but you have to pay something. And I remember it was $3,000. Now for Medtronic, $3,000 is obviously not a lot, but it's that litmus test to drive honesty in, is someone kicking tires, or are they authentically interested? So I like using that, not for the revenue so much, but as the validation of the sincerity of the interest. Let's see, invent, survive, gamble, incent. Was it those four? Right.
Yeah, really. Through those initial phases to get to that point, right?
Yeah, and one pet peeve I have with advice in startups is, you have to hire the right people. And of course that's true. But, if you flip that around and say the opposite, that doesn't make any sense. You have to hire the wrong, who would do that? But it's, how can you attract the right people? And in my case, there were, I guess I'll use three examples there. There are three archetypes. So I already mentioned Mitko, kind of stumbled across him. And then there was a high school student at Egan High School who was just, more brilliant than 99.6 Sigma people, right? It's just a maven. And he, through these focus groups I did, he volunteered for everything. Can I work with you? Can I work with you? So he really liked what I was talking about. So he looked up to me as a role model, and he grew with the company for 14 years, and just was just helping us punch above our weight. So he was really one, and there are more people. I don't want to leave anyone out, so I'm mentioning names, but and then I guess I mentioned one with James, but. With James, he had watched me from afar. We were colleagues a decade earlier. And he got to know me. And then he went to another company, and I did my thing, and I would go pitch him, and I would have the wrong pitch, and he would say no. And then a couple of years later, he would be at another company, and I would go back and pitch him, because I don't give up. And I would get another no, and so on. But he saw I wasn't giving up. And then he had a better sense of timing. So he said, I'll join you. And I mentioned those three examples just because somehow you have to find those people, however you do it, right? Because without them, no way. Obviously this is a team sport. Then the gamble, you have to have a certain level of intestinal fortitude, because as things are going down, to spend more money in some areas, it felt counterintuitive, but you have to be able to trust those principles or your conviction, even though it feels very scary. And then incent, that's just being willing to share, right? Abundance thinking instead of scarcity thinking, but connected to performance. So I'll stop. There are a lot more, but I'll stop there.
Great, thank you.
Good question. Great answer. Any other Questions? We've got some time here yet. I know I've got so many. I won't keep us over the time here, Bjorn. But
I do see one question here in the chat.
oh, did one show up in the chat room? Oh,
Yep. What 3 things would you do differently?
okay. Yep.
So let's see here. Let me think about that. Differently. You know, so this James guy, early on, he was an advisor way before he joined, and he told me to go sell something. Upon which I think I more or less fired him because I didn't think he understood. I had to build this perfect product before I had something to sell. Now, in my defense, I really didn't have anything to sell, so I did have a point. Now he was very strident in saying you got to sell something, right? But I just, it's just my nature. Before I speak, I want to have something of substance to say. I don't want to speak for, I don't love the sound of my own voice, but I want to have something to bring to the table. So I kept polishing that for maybe too long, you know. Those were 4 or 5 very, very difficult years, very stressful. I think I could have shortened that. So that's probably one thing I would have done differently. In retrospect, I don't know, selling the company now that it's going so well, but it was fair. It was good. It was the right decision at the right time, and things have been very good after that as well. So I don't really second guess that differently. So I have several pet peeves with startup advice, and one of them is you got to delegate. That's another one, and of course I know that, and that has not been my issue. My issue has been more over delegation, perhaps, and managing through telepathy instead of good communication, or assuming that telepathy works. So I'm saying that tongue in cheek because for me it's so obvious many times. You live and breathe the company. And it's like, why don't you get this? Why don't you see this? So I think impatience is a virtue if it's informed by pattern recognition. But when impatience is a result of a faulty assumption of what someone knows, then I think that it is not helpful, right? And it doesn't help the person who's working with you. So I would be a little slower in the over delegation. I'm not much of a micromanager, although sometimes I will dive into detail until I see it's being done right. I would probably start selling a little bit sooner. And then the third one, I'll keep thinking about that in the back of my head. I'll have to think about it.
Well, Bjorn, while you're thinking, we did have a question come in around Bulgaria, and I think to tee it up, we probably all were pretty fascinated to hear, first off, if I remember right, that Bulgaria was this hub of software development capability and whatever that was. I don't think that's something we expected to hear, and you discovered that, created this relationship that became really critical. And it worked. So the question that came in is, over time now, since you've been partnering with Bulgaria and the people there in the talent pool, has it changed over time, and has that changed your relationship there in any way, shape, or form?
Absolutely. When we first got in there, it was an undiscovered wild east, so to speak, right? It was very rough for emerging in so many ways, right? And the cost difference was maybe 6x from the States. And the talent was more limited too, and the power went out more often. Now it's heated up. So there are more talented people there, but salaries, especially on the high end, have gone up so much more. So that the cost difference is not at all as great. So it has increased the requirement we have on our Bulgarian colleagues. So we have a lot of management capability in Bulgaria now. We've always had a lot of direct client contact, but it is something that has become more and more pronounced over time. We just promoted 2 more people in Bulgaria to our executive leadership teams. We're 9. Now, 3 of them are from Bulgaria. It used to be 1 for a very long time, right? But we said, it's such, we should have changed that a long time ago. And we're doing design there too. It's not just development, it's quality assurance, it's business analysis, it's project management. So the value add has increased. So Bulgaria has stepped up that game, and we're now in 5 cities, I believe, in Bulgaria. So that's how it's changed.
Interesting. We have a question that I'll tee up, and I think it's from one of our students, maybe an aspiring entrepreneur, and I'll tee it up first. You mentioned that in the gamble phase requires a lot of intestinal fortitude. That's the exact expression you use. I thought when you first started talking about coming out to the world with an invention, especially in the area that you had right after the dot-com bust, that took quite a bit of courage. You might think maybe you were crazy at the time, but clearly it paid off. But kind of with thinking about kind of key characteristics, not as just an innovator, but as an entrepreneur that you would look back on, I'll tee this question up, and this is from our aspiring entrepreneur, is what's the advice you'd give them related to becoming an entrepreneur? If you had to pick the headline or 2 from your experience.
No, it's a good one. What's the right term? I think of, I don't know if everyone's here a chess player, but there's something called positional advantage in chess, meaning, your pieces are lined up in a certain way. You may not, the human brain, we can't think 7 steps ahead. On a chessboard, a computer, maybe, but not a human. So, but there's certain structures that are sound, whether it's a pawn structure or the development of the pieces and so on. And I think the analogy with business is saying, okay, don't just start from scratch. It's great, you have fire in your belly and all those things, and I had those things. But what I think I missed was, I didn't have 10 years of experience in logistics and lots of connections in China. I didn't have assets like that. So I did it in a way that I wouldn't do it again. I would not do it the same way. And one thing I would do differently is to make sure I had some positional advantage. And that's usually, means you take on business partners. That comes with its own, set of challenges, right? Because relationships are difficult. Sometimes, but if you structure them the right way. So I would try to make sure that you have some positional advantages that give you that unfair advantage. That's one thing. Another one is timing. Obviously, I was off on that. But at the same time, because we were there on the bleeding edge and bled, we had the credibility when it was the leading edge and the majority of laggards and all of that, right? We were more credible. So it wasn't worthless. But just being aware of that timing aspect, too early. If there's no market, if there's no competition, there's no market, right? So competition per se is not an issue unless, you're so mature. There's always an opportunity, even, if you have Pepsi and Coke, you can still make a new soda. But so think about timing, think about your positional advantage. And then I think also think about sustainability from your personal situation. I was single without kids when I started. I have no idea how I could have done that if I had had a family. I just, at least for me, I don't think that would have worked. So that personal inventory, I think, is another thing. So if you pick three, I would say, yeah, timing, that positional advantage, and personal inventory.
Interesting. We'll end on this question, just to keep within the time allotted. But the question came in: how do you balance focusing on what you do well, the things that pays the bills, versus pursuing the new opportunities, the new innovation, the transformative part of the market? How do you balance it?
I mean, the short answer is you have to do both. And maybe that's working 80 hours a week, and then you can get both done. And I am serious when I say that. And I worked that hard and harder for years. It really, you can't choose. You have to do both. So it's incumbent upon you to find a way where you can, I mean, if you're really smart and maybe a little bit lucky, do what I call diagonal development. So in software product parlance, when maybe you have a product that's very basic, it has 3 features, let's say 3 features, okay? And then you're trying to sell it to the client, and the client says, well, I really wanted to have 6 features, and you don't have the money to pay to get those done, and so on. So what you tell the client is saying, well, we can move those up on the roadmap, but of course there's a fee for moving them up on the roadmap. So you actually charge for them, right? So now you get some custom development, and I'm using my example, but I think people can extrapolate it. But you get that revenue, you integrate the two, which would be get revenue today. Okay, you're getting it through the fee for moving it up on the roadmap. And then the future one, well, we got to have a product with 6 features because that's what's needed in the marketplace, right? But we don't have enough money to build those 6 features. Where here comes a client, and that's a bit what we did with Medtronic. That was a diagonal development strategy that I executed with Medtronic, and they got what they needed. We got what we needed. So when you can find those silver bullets that are busting through those catch-22s, those are beautiful moments, I think, in business. And you gain, to use the chess parlance again, you gain tempo when you do that. And if you can't find those, well, then you just have to work more hours.
The unknown part of the entrepreneur, I guess. One, just part B to the question, and then we're going to go. When you were going through that incent phase, and you're really concerned about retaining the talent, not losing them to the Targets and the Best Buys, did your employees work those hours, those same hours? Was their passion so high, or by that point did you have it dialed in where you had the resources and that you didn't have to have them working those kind of hours?
I mean, the short answer is some did.
Mm-hmm.
The key players did. They believed in the mission. They had stock. We had people for whom it was only a 9 to 5, and perhaps not even that at times. And then we had people who lived, slept, breathed, bled, MentorMate Blue, and we still have that.
Yeah. And
even to this day, I don't know what the percentage is, but a sizable percentage of the staff is that way still. And now you get into how do you preserve culture and so on. And I think that's part of the magic ingredient. There is a book, I'm going to forget the title, something about habits. It's not the Stephen Covey one, but it's about emotional health and a healthy team,
Yeah.
The team health concept, how you work, play together, that's sustainable and it gives you energy. And what I've learned in terms of team members who I want to stay and who need to go, for me, it's just become about energy. Is someone giving energy or are they taking energy?
Yeah. Well, we could go on and on, Bjorn, but all good things come to an end. And we really appreciate you spending the time and taking the time. I mean, there's a lot in 35 to 40 minutes that there's just no way for you to capture, but you shared so much. And I think it really illuminates the whole idea of innovation and really the growing pains and the pains of entrepreneurship that you and your team, the team that you built, have gone through. So really appreciate the time. I think we've all benefited greatly from it. And thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Everybody give their little clap virtually or whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
And I will get the video link, Jake, to you and to Bjorn
Perfect.
in the not too distant future.
Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Corey.
Yeah, thanks for arranging it, Jake.
Yeah, no worries.
Appreciate it.
Talk soon.
Talk soon.
Bye.